everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Newsflash. My name is Spenser. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We got a great and very exciting lineup of stories to go through. A lot of very important news. We're going to be starting with Omicron once again upending this crazy return to schools and work that is happening all across the country in many different ways right now. Many school districts across the country are closing, but very interestingly, the biggest school system in the nation, the New York City school system, they're going to pretty much try and attack this with swagger, according to the brand new mayor, Eric Adams. Meanwhile, we are just 3 days from the January 6th riot anniversary. We'll take a look at how the Capitol is going to plan on commemorating the day and what we've learned, how we processed it 1 year in. A very, very interesting situation. And in the Senate, Chuck Schumer warned Monday the Senate will debate vote changes to the chamber's rules by January 17th. We'll tell you which changes they will be. And also in Palestine, a controversial situation with a prisoner there refusing food for 140 days, protesting a Israeli policy called administrative detention. We'll tell you a little bit about that. And finally, we will go through some exciting politicians on both parties worth watching in 2022 and kind of what to expect. And I'm very, very happy to be discussing this all today with a guest for the first time on the show today. He is a TUFTS Daily columnist of the column A Better Consensus and the host of his own podcast, a fellow podcaster. Always love having a fellow podcaster on the show. Gen Zers Talk Politics is the name. Jacob Fridman. Thank you. Or Jacob Fridman? Jacob Fridman?
Jacob Fridman.
All right, sounds good. Jacob Fridman, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Glad to be here.
All right, let's get right into it, starting at the top with these school closings and Omicron. It has been very much a kind of a complicated situation because I do feel like, Jacob, to a large extent, we have been almost kind of pushed into this instinct of treating this very scary surge in cases like it is very much like we're dealing with March 2020 all over again and just a really, really bad spike. But first, before we get into anything, I want to get your reaction to kind of Omicron as a variant and how you think the United States is handling it and how maybe they should be handling it, if there's a difference.
Well, as for the variant itself, it's definitely the least lethal, at least for vaccinated Americans, vaccinated people. It's definitely the most has the highest transmissibility of any variant, of any COVID-19 variant. I would say that this variant is definitely scary, but definitely not March 2020. It's not Delta, it's not Alpha, it's not any of the other variants. We have the tools to take it on. We know what works, we know what doesn't, and suggesting that we need to go back to lockdowns is ridiculous. We can't be Australia. We can't be China. We need to use what we have with the vaccines and school and what we know about in-person schooling and testing, especially the testing, and the mask mandates when appropriate, to really hone in on how we can tackle this variant.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess, we're looking at these kind of responses here, I guess. This is in the New York Times. 4 large city school systems, Cleveland, Detroit, Milwaukee, and Newark, have joined a pretty growing list of public schools across the country that have postponed. It looks like just postponed, not like we're not talking like full online semesters here or anything like that. Just postponing reopening after the holiday break, switching to remote instruction for the time being, and have taken these steps both because of COVID-19 outbreaks and for staffing shortages. Because really, I guess what seems to be the biggest effect here from the biggest setback that's causing chaos is just the kind of quarantine time here. So I guess what I'm wondering is, how do you think the government policy has been around this? Do you think with this kind of confusion over the isolation period, with the kind of the Fauci question that he's been going back and forth on this, what is your take on the Biden CDC policy on this? Do you think it is too tough or more or is more of a return to normalcy needed?
Well, I'll go to the first part of your question about the school districts. Frankly, they don't really have much of a choice right now, especially with younger kids. Only now has the FDA started to approve booster shots
Yes.
for 12 to 15-year-olds, I believe. And that's because, they haven't really been good at keeping up with the pace of vaccines of what we need in an Omicron world, what we need in a post-Delta, post 60% vaccinated population in a lot of states. You can't really fault the schools for doing that. You can fault the CDC, you can fault the FDA for slow walking this. That's definitely something that, while not necessarily in Biden's control, it is something on his government that has had a major impact. Also, the testing, major problem. I agree that Biden has not done enough to secure the tests. The Defense Production Act, for example, and other using the federal bully pulpit to get healthcare providers to mass produce and distribute the tests has been lackluster. Although I would not count out this administration because they have done a good job with the vaccine mandates, given that courts have been striking down the mandates. They've been pushing injunctions. They've been trying to hamper an effective response because the vaccine mandates are what's going to really get us out of this. Because obviously the vaccines are very good at reducing hospitalizations, reducing transmission to some extent, and when we get to masking, it's clear that through trial and error, we can find good middle ground solutions to masking. We don't need we don't necessarily need mask mandates for areas where it's fully vaccinated, where you have the vaccine mandates, where you have restaurants and bars, where you have people eating. But protecting immunocompromised people who cannot get vaccinated, that is important, and we should have some mask advisories and some mask mandates. For example, hospitals. Keeping those in place.
Yeah, I definitely think that makes quite a lot of sense. And but really, to me, I think, and again, I'm not entirely sure, the best path on this, because I think a big thing that Americans have been, told to do, and a lot of times, through different types of different political sides have had differing and changing relationships with CDC guidelines from the Trump to Biden presidencies, which has been interesting. We saw obviously the big change was the shortening of the isolation period from 10 to 5 days, which is a big concern, if you're getting COVID, especially if you're asymptomatic and you're not, lucky enough to, for example, I could say that, my family had recently, or just about 5 days ago, tested positive, or at least half of us did, and then that has had, some kind of big, and we're really, some of us were asymptomatic for a little bit, but then, we got pretty much all unsymptomatic. But, that infectious period and understanding that has been a source of definitely a lot of confusion about, when to go back to school, when do you start counting the tests from. So personally, just giving my take on it, and you can definitely react to this. I think the biggest part where I think we need to seek a little bit more kind of clarity and just, buy-in to, in a sense that, the CDC is kind of confident in what they're doing with these regulations, because we saw how quickly they were assailed with that change last week, is just that isolation time and when it is safe to do what after you've tested positive. What do you think about that?
Well, first, I hope your family is okay.
Yeah, we are. Thank you for asking, or for saying that. We are very, very good. Yeah,
that's good to hear. Look, when you look at the flights down airplane, major airports, hundreds of thousands of flights are being canceled because they don't have enough staff. And obviously, the CDC should not be basing their decisions off of economic concerns, off of, mass transit concerns. But when taking into account all the policy dials on, when we look at, outside observers, when we look at the administration as a whole, what they should be doing, it's not entirely unreasonable to think, okay, for asymptomatic people, I believe was what it said, shrinking it from 10 to 5 days. It doesn't, and especially if you have them wear a mask and you have the ventilation in airplanes, for example, and you have vaccine mandates, you have all the other stuff that the Biden administration is pushing, including testing, including, like I said, mask mandates. It doesn't seem to be as big of a worry to shrink that isolation period. But I do understand some people's concerns. I do agree that the CDC's reputation has taken a massive hit, and they do need to rebuild a lot of the confidence in the wider world here in America. But I do believe they still have the best interests of the American people at heart. They still have the best interests of public health at heart. I would not count out this administration. I would not count out the health establishment because at least they still have us at heart. Best interest of public health for the people at heart because they are the bulwark of the modern medicine.
Yeah, I think that is correct to kind of a definitely a large extent there, and really, yeah, I think there's definitely, but I do to a certain extent. Again, just like really, it's not so much the kind of their motives to a certain extent that I would question. I would definitely when it comes to pharmaceutical companies, and again, this is not to imply that the quality of the vaccinations are good, but just certain rhetoric and certain decisions, especially with kind of global vaccinations, they made that kind of lead me to think that it may be a little bit different, but that is a kind of separate situation entirely. But what I think with the federal health officials here, what they have to do is really balance a lot of different concerns. I think it wasn't like the Delta CEO pretty much has bought off the CDC or anything super dramatic like that, but I would not doubt that letter and that kind of public pressure campaign, or not really public and private, I'm sure, pressure campaign a few weeks ago that the Delta CEO put on the CDC did not have any kind of it did not have no impact, so, and then that kind of changing, and now all of a sudden, okay, we hear you, now we're adding back, 2 positive tests. But I think, it would really be, I think what would help, I think kind of for the CDC to gain its, gain the confidence of Americans back maybe a little bit is just say, this is what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and having it kind of be a public health reason that would make sense as opposed to kind of to the whims of public reaction or the whims of, business pressure. And another thing that I really do worry about, Jacob, is I do see what you're saying a lot with the kind of return to work time, and I think a lot of that is probably to do with and the things in terms of things that we're looking at is symptomatic nature and how infectious you can be, because again that just the time the amount of time that I guess that we can have where you're someone sitting at home and kind of not infectious and asymptomatic, like I really feel like that should be minimized just for many reasons, like as much as possible. But the question is, I really think who gets to decide when you're forced to come back to work, because I personally would not want to put that power in the hands of employers. I don't know about you.
I get that. That to your point about the actual rebuilding of trust in the CDC, what we've learned is that most Americans, they don't know. Even myself, we don't know all the inner workings of the CDC. We don't know all the inner workings of vaccine distribution or public health policy, and we're supposed to rely on experts to craft these policies and implement them at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, and what we've seen out of this pandemic is that a good chunk of the population, American population, in most liberal democracies, that relies on experts, that trust in experts to be not perfect, but have a greater degree of accuracy in understanding the world around us than most people, has been lost. They've been they've been soured on the entire concept of expertise. And so at some point, I mean, the CDC, I mean, it would probably help if the CDC just said, okay, we're not going to get everything right, but this is because we are experts, because we've done our homework, and because we are the CDC and not just Alex Jones and his one radio show. We know more. We have the data. We have the science to really go from A, B to C. And obviously you're not going to get everybody, obviously, but I think that would calm a lot of people's fears about, as you said, about the public-private push to get people back to work, with this decrease in isolation time for asymptomatic people. I think that would be helpful in alleviating some of the concerns in the straight bullet points, repeated ad nauseum on all the talk shows, on all the social media sites, and etc.
Yeah, I do agree. Like, kind of making sure that people understand, like, or at least hear the scientific justification behind it. And speaking, there's many different strategies. CDC has one strategy, and the new mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, has another. I don't know if have you heard Mayor Adams' comments today, Jacob, at all?
Right, the swagger comment.
Yes. Yeah, you're not going to be able to, because I asked because you're not going to be able to hear it when I play it for the audience. But here's what he had to say earlier today as schools were opening.
When the mayor has swagger, the city has swagger. We've allowed people to beat us down so much that all we did was wallow in COVID. That's all we did. And we no longer believed. This is a city of swagger. This is a city of resiliency. And all of these messages out there of what is going to happen, we're going to survive.
So, yeah, I mean, that is definitely kind of an interesting way of putting it. This definitely a new sheriff in town for sure. What do you think of that kind of approach? Do you think it's more kind of rhetorical strategy? What was your reaction to the comments?
I mean, de Blasio was not a great public speaker. He was not very good at rallying New Yorkers around being the virus. Time will tell what Eric Adams is able to do. But, in-person schooling, which is, I think, the main centerpiece of what he has been trying to do, that seems to be a winning strategy. If New York has a vaccine mandate, it's New York. They have that vaccine mandate. They have I think they have a mask advisory of some kind. They have, they're not, Texas, where they're blowing off a lot of the federal guidelines here.
Yeah.
I think no matter what spin Adams puts on it, if you can effectively rally New Yorkers behind, vaccine mandates, behind the in-person schooling, safe with masks, with testing, with whatever they come up with, whatever seems sound. Mm-hmm. I think it doesn't again, it doesn't matter what he calls it. He will it would be successful.
Yeah, I definitely do agree with that. And I think honestly, schools were one of the big areas where de Blasio did get some credit because he kind of kept them relatively open. Obviously they were closed in the early periods, but in terms of March and stuff like that, he was able to keep them open with low rates of COVID. But again, this is kind of a different situation, trying to have limited interruption as much as possible. It's I think the sky high case numbers are going to create a lot of fear for some people, but really I think if there's, and especially the isolation periods are going to cause a lot of chaos, and that could lead to some consternation. But I really do kind of think it could be short term. If you're looking at, 2 weeks down the road, everything's kind of just back to normal, or not back to normal, but, kind of up and running, all those schools, districts across the country that went virtual are now coming back, but Adams didn't do it, and, they're able to ride out this high wave.
Right. I mean, one, it's not about cases anymore. It's about hospitalizations. Mm-hmm. Two, Fauci and all the health officials have said that this is not a matter of months. It's just a matter of like 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
That it's a big spike I've seen in South Africa, and I've seen other countries that have got hit earlier with the Omicron variant than we have, or at least officially.
Yeah, I think that is definitely because we're looking at. I've been looking at a little bit about the case curve in like London and South Africa, and it's very, very high. But once it falls, it doesn't luckily fall very, very fast. All right, so let's move on now to our next story, and that is the January 6th riot. It is almost 365 days since that day, and this is here in the New York Times. You're checking in on what is going on 1 year later. So there will be a congressional committee investigating the attack, now confronting a series of difficult questions, including how forcefully it deflects its subpoena power and whether the Supreme Court will stymie a major element of its inquiry. So as the 9-panel member panel continues to examine the events leading up to the worst attack on Congress in centuries, it is waiting to see whether the Supreme Court will refuse a request from President Donald J. Trump to block the committee's access to White House records related to the riot. The committee also has not ruled out moving to subpoena members of Congress, Trump, or former Vice President Mike Pence. So, Jacob, I was wondering, pretty much just to start here, what do you think this committee kind of needs to do? Like, what does it need to kind of accomplish to kind of get past this coup? And, is it doing its job so far?
Loaded question. If you've been following me for a while, my podcast or my personal feeds, you'll know that I am a big proponent for the committee, a big proponent for taking a hard stance on the insurrectionists, on the ringleaders of January 6th. And what I've seen from Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney's committee is that they have done a lot of good. They've more or less subpoenaed Bannon. They've subpoenaed a lot of officials of the ringleaders of the insurrection. They've gotten Bannon on criminal contempt of Congress. I don't think it really falls with the committee. My misgivings with the autopsy of the insurrection, it more lies with Merrick Garland at DOJ. The fact that, yes, we have about 500 people, insurrectionists indicted, that means nothing when Donald Trump, Mark Meadows, and et al. Are just running around, promoting conspiracy theories and riling up the base again for another insurrection, when they're still going on anti-liberal democracy purge they're going on. The fact that Trump can safely run in 2024 is ridiculous. It is a stain on democracy. The fact that 147 House Republicans that signed off on challenging electoral count on fraudulent basis have not received, and even after the insurrection happened, that number went down, but those that still remained after the insurrection have not been expelled from Congress is just mind-blowing. The fact that Republicans could be taking the Congress this fall, absolute lunacy. The Republican Party does not deserve power. It does not deserve any semblance of any veneer of responsible governance. They're not responsible. They're not responsible in policy. This party does not deserve the benefit of the doubt anymore. They've shown their true colors. Kevin McCarthy has been stonewalling and will stonewall the committee. And there's no, and the fact that he hasn't been dealt with anything by the committee, or at least not, in full effect, is ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that, the committee really, because just starting from the base, I guess, for me, when I look at January 6th, I think the biggest question to me overall is, it's really two big things that I worry about. Like the first off is, the kind of credibility of elections, which, once you have that idea that all elections are, going to be rigged or in some way stolen, within such a sizable chunk of the GOP base, which I think is a lot higher than people realize. Like, what effect does that have on future elections? And it's going to be interesting because I definitely think just, the way the winds are shifting politically, like they may just win outright and not even have to worry about it in 2022. But that culture, I think, is going to be, it's going to be very, very hard to get rid of. But when you're talking about in terms of them actually able to kind of carry out their will, first of all, I definitely don't think, look at the actual day of the riot. They were pretty much, I'm not saying they're let in, does not imply any kind of a conspiracy really between the two, because there's just no evidence for that. But I think just the lack of preparation and the lack of appropriate security just, I think, is one of the biggest questions that the January 6th committee has not answered so far. And I think, that to me is something that really makes me wonder and kind of raising my eyebrows, because we know multiple, FBI informants have had, deep links inside these groups. And heck, they were out here on Facebook kind of planning the whole thing well in advance. And if the FBI, like the FBI, the NSA, we know the contents of our surveillance state. We know what it's capable of. The fact that they let these, Facebook posts just slip by, I find that, kind of shocking, if very hard to believe. So it's kind of hard to really get it's kind of hard to get too invested, I think, almost for me in the January 6th committee, because those questions are so at top of mind, looking at, how predictable this was and how easily it was kind of allowed to happen. I don't know where you stand on that.
And those are all valid points. I would say that the reason why, at least one of the reasons why the Capitol was so underdefended that day, was because Trump fired Esper at the Defense Department and put in Kash Patel, the guy, some random nobody who worked under Devin Nunes and his nonsensical, pro-Russia fanfic from the House Intelligence Committee when he was in charge as chief of staff. And he basically ran the Pentagon with some puppet, Christopher Miller, as the acting defense secretary. And you're right. The intelligence warnings about these groups like the Oath Keepers and 3%ers, they were lackluster. They were not received by Capitol Hill police. There was miscommunication. There was, there was some kind of shooing away of the warnings. I agree that the committee hasn't really answered that. But, all the people on the ground, the actual rioters who smeared poop on the walls and called for Nancy Pelosi to be hanged and Mike Pence to be hanged, stopping those people is not going to stop the next January 6th. We need to go after John Eastman. We need to go after Janet Ellis. We need to go after Mark Meadows. Get them to talk. What did they do? They wrote memos. They had PowerPoints. They had authoritarian's dream. They had they had all the briefing meetings. Rudy was involved. I'll accept Donald Trump's spoken word, written word, spoken word. They had a coup underway. They had a plot to subvert the government, to subvert the duly elected president of the United States, Joe Biden. And the fact that the committee has not begun to enforce subpoenas on them, and Merrick Garland, for his part, has not been going after them himself, I do agree is a fault I have with the committee and the federal government's response to January 6th.
Yeah, I think that is, that is very interesting, because I think it really, it's very, very much, I feel like, against the grain for a deep level for these people, as crazy and as outsiderish, within the DC world as Trump is, he is a former president, and going after former presidents, and it's been long suggested for many of them, but from many different kind of courts of the political public opinion. But it's very rarely actually done. So I mean, I feel like kind of crossing that threshold, as important as it is, in terms of actually getting to the bottom of this, is going to be something that Merrick Garland is going to have a very hard time doing, just because for whatever maintaining order kind of reason that I wouldn't say I entirely agree with, is just not done very often. And in terms of I guess what I would be kind of curious to see is like what happens once Trump and Pence and all those people kind of say what they were going, because I guess I don't really like take too much, like I don't really think seriously, because if that was January 6th, obviously probably going to be right the high watermark, they get into the Capitol through a really kind of poor like lack of security, and then what happens, they get in, pretty much can't really do anything but wander around almost, and most of the people dying were actually rioters dying from the interactions they had with each other, whether it was like they tased themselves, it was just very much an unorganized group. If you look at the group, for example, thinking of a recent kind of military coup, look at what happened in Bolivia. Those people were out in the streets beating people, killing people. That was a coup and organized group that you kind of have to take, I think, a lot more seriously. And what I'm not saying that you're proposing this or anything that needs to happen, or any really, but I really am kind of skeptical of the people who say, oh, we need more surveillance, more laws, more kind of stuff like that, because if we have,
I agree.
Yeah,
we don't need to expand the surveillance state. I'm not calling for that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying use the laws we already have against insurrection. Use the laws we already have against plotting coups. Use the laws we already have to go after Trump, go after Meadows, go after Jenna Ellis, go after Lauren Boebert, go after the people in Congress that were elite, that were helping the rider, that could have been helping the riders. Go after the people in Congress that are going to subvert the Electoral College, subvert the integrity of the vote.
So for these people though, like what would that kind of going after, like what would that look like? Because would would they face kind of criminal charges or
Yes. There's like a I believe in the 13th or 14th Amendment after the Civil War. There's an article about insurrection, and I believe that carries some penalty and also carries the thing of never holding federal office again. These people do not deserve to hold federal office. Trump does not deserve to become a candidate for president again. Boebert and Louis Gohmert and all the others, they don't deserve to hold their seats when they've quite possibly engaged in a conspiracy against the United States government, against the transfer of power. Part of what I would want to see is determining, do these people deserve to be barred from holding federal office as part of their punishment? Because they now hold federal office of which they probably tried to overthrow. They tried to, upend illegally.
Yeah, I mean, you had to imagine, if it was them who had lost, or if they do lose in the future, they may try and pull the same thing again, and there's no kind of, there's no reason to think that they wouldn't. Even, I think it's possible they may not have to next time around, but there's no reason definitely to say that they wouldn't. But I really think in terms of the political muscle that's going to take is going to be very, very hard. And then what do you do about the huge chunk of the population, 30%, whatever, that has these beliefs deeply held, and there's not going to be any force out there to kind of do away with them, because ideas can be pretty hard to kill.
Right. And just want to segue to your next topic here. That's going to require major legislative bills, major reforms to the election process,
yes.
a la Reconstruction. What I some some people following the Civil War might risk at this, but I believe that we need some kind of second Reconstruction to deal with this matter, to deal with the cancer known as Trumpism.
That is interesting that you kind of phrase it that way, because, like, would you say, like, what were some of these rules? I definitely say, I think voting rights, because really the secret kind of, not so secret project of the Republican Party, by and large here, not even just like the hardcore Trump people, has been to make voting pretty much impossible unless it's same day with an ID.
Right. The Freedom to Vote Act that Manchin built out of the as a compromise bill. When Schumer gets it going to stop the filibuster for voting rights as an exception, I believe that's your next topic here. That should be up for a vote. So should be the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that shores up the parts of the Voting Rights Act that John Roberts' Supreme Court gutted, because those were major steps in helping in continuing support for Black Americans, especially in Georgia. It also counts the Electoral Count Act that shores up the holes in the original legislation from, I believe, 1877, based on the election of 1876. That was very contested. That ended in a backroom compromise that saw the official end of the Reconstruction in the South.
Yes, yeah, that was definitely some wheeling and dealing will be happening there, I think, for sure. But yeah, I do want to get into that, what you mentioned there, the Senate, Chuck Schumer's ideas of kind of rule changes. And the biggest thing is election reform. So his threat seems inevitable. Republicans are going to try and block this legislation. Senate Democrats have tried to find a path forward on this from Politico here on elections reform and voting rights legislation, arguing that doing so is necessary to ensure ballot access in GOP-led states that have enacted new restricted laws. Senate Republicans, again, I think, really knowing where their bread's buttered, whatever side of the kind of hardcore Trump spectrum to, let's just limit these voting laws here, what by any means necessary. I think they all know where their bread is buttered. They're unanimously opposed to this, describing it as an attack on our federal system. Progressives along argued that Democrats need to nix the legislative filibuster in order to pass the bills, while both Senator Manchin and Sinema support the legislation. Both avowed they will not scrap the chamber's 60-vote threshold. So it looks like they can kind of get this by to change the rules to get this with the votes of Sinema and Manchin. They can count on those votes to change the rules to pass this bill, for which they can also kind of count on the Sinema Manchin votes here. Is that a correct statement?
I believe it is. This has been a major hurdle for Biden and for Democrats trying to pass these crucial voting rights legislation. I would say that it's about time. It is about time that this happened, because we've been waiting for almost a year now, while the Senate has been rightly focused on economic recovery and Build Back Better. This cannot go to waste. The midterms are coming up. It's now less than a year. We need to have the protections in place to stop, GOP governors and state legislatures, particularly the state legislatures, from rigging the ballot, from locking people out of voting, to stop this what Stacey Abrams calls the new Jim Crow, which like the wording or not, is having effect on Black Americans.
Yeah, I think that is definitely a fair statement to say there. But I think really I think the biggest indictment here, if you're looking at this, is this these two bills, would be on the kind of the White House and kind of Democratic leadership here, because these are just so important priorities. And if I think they're really what I have an issue with, I guess, is time management system here, because if they're going to get kind of strung along for months and months by Sinema Manchin on a thing that, I was like a lot of people were saying that this is going to be a very kind of dead end negotiation, 3 months into the 6 month process, or however long that kind of endless Build Back Better negotiation period is. And, again, it is, I'm not going to lie, also a little disappointing. The best thing that this administration can do is pass these very moderate, kind of middle-of-the-road bills, like running on the For the People Act, and then that kind of just immediately, for example, falling out. That is going to be disappointing and, a little bit of a Debbie Downer for sure. But I definitely say, again, about time, something that definitely needs to be done.
Right. I mean, we can disagree on the minute details of, say, voter ID or, some of the dark money disclosure rules. But by and large, for freedom to vote, John Lewis voting rights, and the Electoral Count Act will be some of the most profound pieces of legislation passed in this Congress, passed under the Biden administration, because they are starting. This is the beginning of the rectification of the past, God knows how many decades at this point, of extreme right-wing radicalization of anti-liberal democracy actions that include gerrymandering, that include particularly partisan / racial gerrymandering, that include the stopping of vote by mail and the ballot boxes.
Yeah, I definitely think that is something, like making it easier to vote and making just the ballot box more accessible to people. It had great results in 2020, and not necessarily all of those results were for the Democratic Party and the left. So it's kind of funny how obsessed the GOP is with this, even when politically they don't really even, I think, need to be as much. So it is going to be very interesting. But the thing I worry about for the Democrats is, oh yeah, sure, you can make it easier to vote, but if you haven't given people anything to vote for, when time comes around that they can really feel in a very tense and chaotic situation, it is going to be a rough time for you. Although I do think, the gerrymandering stuff that they actually did, I've been looking at some of the maps, a lot better than I was expecting going into it.
I mean, look, both parties do it. This is not to say this is purely a Republican problem. This is not to disavow the Democrats' part of this. This is why I'm against partisan gerrymandering in all its forms. But this is where I have to say, if people do not turn out in 2022 and 2024 on a sheer basis of liberal democracy and protecting the integrity of the vote, protecting multi-ethnic America, multiracial America, then I don't know what to do. Then at some point it's on the people. It's on the people who say, okay, even though we don't have everything we want, even though we don't have all of this, I'm still going to go and cast my vote and actually participate in not just federal but in state and local politics. Because when Seattle, as Tom Nichols pointed out, has like 10%, 14% primary turnout, that's not that's not healthy. That's not in Democratic primaries. 14% Democratic primary in Seattle. That's not healthy. That's not a body politic that actually cares. That's not a body politic that really deserves liberal democracy. They don't show up.
Yeah, I think that we time-wise that is I think I do want to get into this a little bit more, because that's a very, very interesting kind of conversation, and looking at coming at it from the average person's political perspective. I think if you're of a certain, because it's all about really your relationship to politics. Like, if you don't think that for a long time, because people have been tuned out for a long time, because so many people feel that politics is just a show, and no matter who's in charge, nothing fundamentally changed. Joe Biden will say it, Donald Trump will say it, but there's going to be a lot of hand wringing, and I think for a lot of people that's all that this is, and it's going to be because for a lot of different reasons, a lot of different factors, especially whether you're in a red state and it's going to be tougher to vote, or you're in a blue state and you feel like or you're in a swing state and it's going to be tougher to vote, or you're in a red or blue state and you feel like, I guess, your vote doesn't really count. I definitely think that there's a lot of, legitimate reasons why people would be severely, especially after these last 2 years, severely kind of dissatisfied with the government. And also, the no two political parties would be catering to people. Like the turnout was exceptionally high in 2020. I think that's because ballot access was incredibly easier. But
66% or whatever the hell that number was in the 60s, that's actually weak for democracy such as the United States.
Oh,
that's incredibly weak.
I heard that
it was only in the 60s or something. Not
was 2020 not the highest since like 1919, or was that was I misreading that?
True, but that's still not great compared to almost every other democracy. And youth turnout was in the 50s, and we were patting ourselves on the back and saying, "Oh, that's great! Keep voting, kids."
Yeah,
it's not. It's not. If we want to say that, okay, we live in a democracy, we live in a place where everyone's vote should count. We should strive to be that way. And you go protest on the streets, rightly as you should. Let's say for Black Lives Matter, like that. Yes, that's a good thing to go out and protest for. But when you don't show up at a ballot and think, oh, it's all worthless anyway. My vote doesn't count. I can't at least make change on a local level. That doesn't, it doesn't, you can protest all you want, but if you don't actually vote, there's no way in hell your ideas will ever have a chance of being represented.
Yeah, I think, I'm definitely all for kind of like strategic voting. If you feel like, for example, if you want to leave the, top of the ticket blank and then you say, like, you like your representative and you want to support your representative on the state or local level, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense. But, if you're a Democrat, for example, and you're voting for Joe Biden, you're probably supporting Joe Biden because he, is going to do or he said he was going to do a number of like key things. For example, like climate change spending, the Build Back Better agenda. That's a big issue for youth and things. Or
right.
And if you see the Democratic Party and you see Joe Biden publicly coming out against, these are not publicly coming out necessarily against, but cutting out of this bill, capitulating to someone with deep ties to coal and Joe Manchin, and just like a party that fundamentally either can't or won't fight for you and the issues that you care about. I mean, it's hard to, ask people to come out and do that. And I think that's a fundamental mistake that people are going to make who end up losing, elections. Hillary Clinton was very great about, why didn't people vote for me? Like, I give them the best possible, like,
we live in a post-policy
campaign
world.
And everything.
We live in a post-policy world that, yes, people care about, people on the left, especially younger people, care about climate change, as I do. They care about Black Lives Matter, as I do. But it's not, young people don't vote. They still do not vote at the rates that older people do. They not vote at the rates that, adults do. And that's why, forget policy for a second. We have to get turnout. We just have to get turnout itself higher than normal. The bottom line is that it doesn't matter. Policy doesn't matter when you're not when you don't have the right, when you don't have any vote, when you don't have any representation.
And I also think you won't get turnout up unless people see that politics is working for them.
True, but then maybe people don't really, deserve to have that, because, it's not just when politics, it's not just when, normal situation when you have two rational parties, when it's, let's say, let's say it's like a center right and center left party, actual center right, center left parties. When, say, the center left party is in power, having the center right just say, okay, we're out of politics forever, doesn't matter. We're not going to vote this year. That's not responsible citizenry. It's especially not it's definitely not responsible when you have an authoritarian, anti-liberal democracy, extremist right-wing party, in charge, in charge, or now almost going to break down the center left hold right now, And people on the center left are saying, okay, it's inevitable. The authoritarian center right's right-wing party is gonna take hold. Our vote doesn't matter. It hasn't mattered for 40 years. All we can do is really protest. That doesn't build good habits of active citizenry. It doesn't build good habits of just casting your right to vote. We have that right in the Constitution. We have that right on the books. Mm-hmm. But that's part of the contract you have with the United States. If you're a citizen and you want change to happen, you need to vote. You need to actually, participate.
Yeah, and part of that, because I really think it's not as much about two parties, and I may have I personally don't really feel that as much, so one allegiance to one party or another, but I think really if you're most people and especially the large portion of people who aren't part of any party but don't follow politics, they're not in the middle, they're just kind of tuned out. It doesn't start with one particular, or maybe it does, but I think it's really just a trend. It's like you see people promise things and nothing happens. Like the system is almost at the decisions that actually affect people's lives, which by and large, that is going to be what people make their political decisions on. I think rightfully so. Decisions that actually affect your life are made, right in the workplace, in boardrooms, in much more higher kind of commanding points of the economy. And politicians have proven that they just don't have any control over that. I think to a lot of people, and until that changes, it just will be very, very tough to get that turn up by kind of almost like shaming people or kind of like pressuring people for their duties as a citizen, as important as those are.
I mean, if January 6th is not enough to bring people out and say, okay, clearly something went horribly wrong here, I'm gonna vote to make sure the people who did this will never take power again. If that doesn't happen, I don't know what to do anymore. Like that's not a democracy. That's not a people that cares about the institutions of government. That's just a people that says, okay, government, just I'll take what I can get. Just make sure the my deliveries come on time. Make sure the water comes through my faucet. And the rest of policy I don't really care about. Like that's not a serious citizenry. It does. At some point the burden needs to be on the people to show up, not just the politicians.
Yeah, well, I definitely think that is a very, very interesting conversation we could and should get into for a long, long time. But I do want to move on to this story here. I really was kind of taken by this. Didn't really entirely intend on doing this story, but I did see a very, very sad video of this man named Hisham Abu Hawash. He's a Palestinian prisoner, and he was at a hospital bed connected to an IV with his two kids kind of crying around. It was a very, very sad situation, right? And these situations, obviously, as I'm sure you would agree, Jacob, they're very complicated. So the first thing I want to do is kind of dig into this, look into what was going on. This guy Hisham Abu Hawash, he's been on a hunger strike for 140 days here. This is according to TRT World, the kind of Turkish government, kind of NPR, kind of public, news site backed by the Turkish government. Human rights groups and the International Committee of the Red Cross have expressed concern over Abu Hawash's health condition, and so it's he's not in a good way, kind of going into these impromptu comas and very much in danger of losing his life. He's a 40-year-old father of 5 from the West Bank town of Dura near Hebron, and he's been in a policy called administrative detention in Israeli jails since October of 2020. Such detentions are ordered by military courts, and they can last months. And here's the best part. They can last months without charges being disclosed. Really kind of a crazy situation. So these are renewed every 6 months for an indefinite period of time, and they can order that. So military courts can order the detention of a suspect based on undisclosed evidence without trial or charge. Israel says it uses administrative detention when it fears immediate security risks, But of course, rights groups have demanded a halt to the controversial practice, saying it is a tool to kind of suppress Palestinian society. So, Jacob, what is your, I'm not going to begrudge you the chance to give you a little bit more kind of context about your positions on this, and I also would like to know your reaction to this story in particular.
Where to start with this one? Well, let's just put my cards on the table. Where I am on this conflict. I'm Jewish. Okay, I've gone to Israel. I've gone to AIPAC. I've done several episodes of my podcast about the conflict. I've hosted a conversation between Israeli and Palestinian about the conflict. And I wrote a column in the TUFTS Daily about what I see as a possible solution to the conflict. And in that solution, I more or less said that right now, there is no grand vision for how this should actually end. There's no, we've gone too far in the sense of everything is just status quo, and nothing's ever going to change, or it's going to change for the worse, or it's just going to go in one direction that, pisses people off, and it's going to inflame the tensions even more. And what I called for was what I like to call the pro-unity solution. And what that basically is that Israel keeps everything within the 1948 Green Line borders, and including the Golan Heights from the 67 war, but the West Bank is transformed into this Palestinian state, and Gaza would be determined later as it's run by Hamas, but the West Bank would be entirely A, B, and C would entirely be under a Palestinian state, and what would happen is that there would be an overarching European Union type confederation that would foster freedom of movement for people, goods, and capital. That would serve as the basis for peaceful coexistence between the two states, since the Palestinians and Israelis are heavily interconnected economically and even socially to some extent, regardless of what is seen on CNN. As for this case, I agree. It is horrific. I agree that administrative detention is not a good policy. If I may ask, do you know where this man was arrested? Do we know?
I would. He's currently being held at Belenson Hospital in Petah Tikva, but he was recently transferred from Israel's Ramleh prison. So yeah, that would be. I don't know exactly where physically, where he was picked up, but yeah.
The reason I asked that is because there's a context here that needs to be addressed, and that is the Oslo Accords. What this basically was that there was Israel with a full control within its Green Line pre-1967 war borders, and a West Bank, which Israel had as part took as part of the when they won the 6-Day War from Jordan. In 1993, I believe, the Oslo Accords said, okay, we're going to have areas A, B, and C. A and B would have civilian control under the newly constructed Palestinian Authority with Fatah, part of Palestinian leadership. And there will also be military control, Palestinian military control in Area A, and Israeli military control in Area B. And Area C would be under Israeli military and civil control. Although it would not be officially part of Israel, it would still be held as a future Palestinian state in the West Bank. And depending on where this man was picked up, depending on where he's being held, on a location of where these cities are in the West Bank, or even in Israel proper, Israel would have the right under the Oslo Accords to do this. The simple act of having police forces, of conducting police work, although the actual policy administrative detention The actual legality under international law, yes, is let's just say disputed. I don't know the whole story about this, but I would say that there is a larger context here about the not just this case, but in the whole conflict in general, and particularly when it comes to the West Bank, that I feel need to be addressed, because that context of the Oslo Accords never doesn't always get fully explained in conversations like this. And it is my view that the Oslo Accords, while yes, technically dead, they're still alive, because we still have the framework of areas A, B, and C. And regardless of Bibi's taunts of annexation, where Israel takes the entirety of Area C and maybe the entire West Bank into its own, and Israel proper, it's still the actual sharing of control between Israel and the PA, the actual security cooperations, economic cooperations, visa and travel restrictions aside. There is a framework for a better future that does get lost in conversations like these.
Yeah, I think that would be really a very, very nice kind of a situation, especially, the social loss that has taken place from, not having that freedom of movement, not having Palestinians being able to, travel and see their families who are, go to Jerusalem, for example, that are would be in the West Bank without a lot of kind of a pain in the ass if they're even able to go at all. That I think would be something that a lot of people would like to see, but I question how much of that exists, like the appetite for that exists in Israel politics, because so much of that is. If you look at the Palestinian Authority, for example, a lot of people, Palestinians, don't have that much faith, frankly, in the Palestinian Authority, just because they have been, kind of very weak, and there's been some pretty strong allegations of, corruption. Say if you're living in a situation where, Israel can pretty much pick you up off the street in a position like this, It's very, very hard not to want a strong force. And right now, the fact is the only kind of, although they are incredibly weak, the only strong force in that region who's willing to take, almost talk really and talk in a violent way. That's really all that they can do. It would be Hamas. And I think America has a big role in kind of creating Hamas and kind of destabilizing this situation when their actions, in the kind of late 2000s, but what they have to do is kind of, before any kind of better future, which we all would like to see, can be realized. I think the credibility and the dynamics and the credibility and trust, I think basic trust, has to be established so much, because I think so much of that has been really been lost by the very aggressive and kind of I don't know if annex is not really a word, but just the very much forward-moving, shall we say, expansive policies of Israel.
Settlements.
Yeah, settlements, kind of moving in and all, very annexation threats, all that kind of stuff.
Yes, I would say though that Hamas was more or less brought out of inner Palestinian strife rather than direct result of the United States or Israeli actions. Regardless of the withdrawal from Gaza by Israeli forces in 2005, Sharon, and the subsequent blockades and Israeli-Egyptian action is more or less based upon inter-Palestinian strife rather than external forces. But I do agree that, yes, Israel since particularly Bibi Netanyahu's policies have definitely have helped accelerate the complete breakdown of Israeli-Palestinian government relationship, at least on a top-tier level of leadership, and particularly the settlements. And I agree that a lot of these settlement provocations are just that, provocations, are not based on anything substantial, rather just provocations. But, I would say that we would have to understand, in order to understand some of the Israeli mindset, We look to the 2000s with the Second Intifada, and the Israeli left collapsed, and they haven't been able to gain more than 10 seats since then. They've definitely collapsed since the 1990s, since 2000. That's the 1980s, and they've never been able to regain that promise they had in the first 30 years of Israel's existence, from 48 to the 70s. But I would say that it obviously doesn't excuse anything that's happened, but it does provide some context to know that Bibi himself, after the failed talks of Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert in the 2000s, that gave a lot of land, that would have given a lot of land to the Palestinians in the West Bank, that would have tried to solve Jerusalem, at least brought a framework for Jerusalem. This is when Israelis kind of said, okay, as long as we're safe, as long as we're not getting blown up in pizza parlors, we're not going to be, we're not going to have to worry about this. And Bibi kind of provided kind of bolster that mentality.
Yeah, I really think, that is a very, that mentality that, you say with the kind of collapse of the Israeli left. I think, as long as, Israel, like, I guess the mindset that kind of exists, or the dual mindsets, between the left and right, is it more about kind of realizing the full Israeli state, or is it about kind of being, improving, I guess, the one that you kind of already have? Would be really, the mindset there. And I think really, if you look at what their, kind of how they started, and, pretty much every action, or not every action, but, the general trend of, the Israeli project being, I would say, not too dissimilar to, the westward expansion, mindset of America at
hold on
certain
there.
time period.
Here's the thing. Israel itself, I mean, are you talking about the West, in that analogy you're talking about just the West Bank, or talking about Israel as a whole?
I'm talking about, in the West Bank, I'm talking about, I guess Golan Heights, for example, would be, another example, because it's really just about, in terms of the hard, especially the most right-wing elements of Israeli politics, they've said this, it's about kind of, creating more spaces for Jews.
Well, here's the thing, though. That analogy breaks down when you realize that, much of the land, even the Golan Heights, has roots in Jewish culture, has roots in ancestral homeland. And if we take into account that Palestinians go back hundreds of years, and Jews also go back hundreds of thousands of years, that having self-determination in ancestral homeland, it shouldn't cancel each other out, but Jews should not be, that self-determination for Jews, Zionism is, the self-determination in ancestral homeland should not be, discounted when we talk about the conflict. And two, we look at and you mentioned Golan Heights. In 1967, Israel said to Egypt, if you block the Suez Canal, we will consider that an act of war. And when 1967, the Six-Day War came, and Egypt started it with, blocking the Suez Canal, I think it was Suez Canal, blocking the Red Sea. Israel then launched a preemptive strike when they saw the mobilization of the Syrian, Jordan, Lebanese, Egyptian forces. So, and that meant that it was defensive war. It was to Israel and to, I believe, the United States, it was defensive war. And under a defensive war in international law, if you are on defense, you're allowed to keep whatever territory you gain from that war. And that includes Golan, that includes the West Bank, that includes Gaza, and that includes the Sinai Peninsula, which Israel actually gave back to Egypt in their peace deal with them in, I believe, 1979. And obviously the Golan, that was considered for quite a while when there was a less civil war Syria that was in secret negotiations with Israel for a peace deal. But what I'm saying is that the analogy of Bibi being more or less, oh, manifest destiny is our thing from God. No, it's more of a it goes back to what Israel was founded on, Zionism. It goes back to long-standing actual basis in international law. It goes back to actual tangible causes, points here that go beyond just, oh, we're going to have this land because a bunch of religious people and people who like the economic benefits decide, okay, we're going to set up base in Jericho, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I definitely think, what I think the goal you and I both want to see is kind of this kind of coexistence and kind of equal standard for both groups, and they're both groups and the different classifications that Israel gives Palestinians depending on where they reside in all of these territories. But again, I think really what we're talking about is I just do not like the biggest difference that we have. I think is that is just not in the way Israeli politics, and this obviously could change, but in the way the Israeli politics is currently constituted, I just don't think that those are the goals right now.
I mean, look at Yair Lapid, okay? The current foreign minister has had several comments where he has taken into account the life of Israeli Arabs within the Green Line, within the pre-1967 borders. He's also talked a bit about the West Bank Palestinians and Gaza. And he's been more open to cooperation with the Palestinians than the current Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, and certainly more than Benjamin Netanyahu. And Benny Gantz just met with Abbas, Mahmoud Abbas, the PA leader from the West Bank. And so it seems like Israel's finally getting some sort of vision, because, like I said before, the Oslo Accords are still here. They're still active in the sense they still have the power sharing structure and they still have the governments. And I agree the vision is actually dead, but no one since Omert in 2007 when the final peace talks broke down, when again, as I mentioned, they over 90% of the West Bank and a framework for Jerusalem was proposed, and the Palestinians shot it down in 2000 when Ehud Barak had an even larger deal 7 years before with Clinton and Arafat, and Arafat struck it down according to President Clinton. Part of what happened here was that Israel kind of said, okay, if you Palestinian leadership don't want this deal, do not want to move forward to at least have build upon the Oslo Accords, okay, then we're not going to really do that either. And I agree that that's a foolish mindset to take, but now it seems like, even though Lapid has said that he's not going to meet with Abbas during his premiership, hopefully next year, there is some sort of post Bibi restart of a long process of peace.
Yeah, hopefully we do get more and more in that situation, and hopefully, I am proven wrong on the kind of the motivations of Israel and their kind of political system and almost like reason for being in the first place. That would be good to see movement in that right direction with kind of bringing down the temperature. Almost bringing the temperature away from more kind of like expansionary kind of settlement efforts as to more kind of reconciliatory things. Before we, because I know we have gone on a little bit long here. Jacob, do you want to get into? Do you have to go, or do you want to get into a little bit more kind of politicians to watch in 2022?
I'll bite. Let's go.
All right, let's get into it. Yeah, because it's a very going to be a very big year. 22 arrives, midterms here. Very, very interesting situation. This is a list here of some fresh faces from the Daily Beast, and we'll kind of weigh in as well as to where politics is going. The first person up here is Charles Booker. You may remember him from 2 years ago. He's a former state representative and ran as a pretty progressive force against Amy McGrath in really what was almost a dead-in-the-water campaign against Mitch McConnell in 2018, Amy McGrath was, and it was really kind of telling how out of nowhere Booker came and was able to really this was 2020. This was last year. Oh my goodness. Wow, I thought that was 2018. How time flies. Anyway, Booker will be running against Senator Rand Paul for re-election in 2022. I don't think he's gonna, do well just because he won't have that kind of national media support behind him. But I really like a lot of what he's doing, especially trying to connect and really bond from his favorite saying being from the hood to the holler, saying, the working class inner cities of Kentucky have a lot more in common than they think with the maybe a little bit more socially conservative people in the quote unquote holler, around economic policy and, things like, Medicare for all is what he's running on. The Kentucky New Deal, ending poverty, delivering quality health care to everyone in our Commonwealth, and fixing our crumbling infrastructure. And this is, again, not to say this guy's any kind of slouch on social issues. He ran his 2020 campaign really on, police reform and, demanding justice for Breonna Taylor, who that case was very, very big around that time. So do you think Charles Booker is the future of the Democratic Party, Jacob?
I mean, I agree with you. He's not going to win. It's just, it's a red wave year.
Yeah.
It's Rand Paul, and it's Kentucky. It's not very, besides an Andy Bashir, it's not very, it's not a good place for Democrats. I mean, I think it depends on what he himself does after he loses. He most likely loses. I can definitely see him trying to succeed Bashir when he's done. But in terms of his actual policies, I mean, look, if it can work for John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, I mean, I don't know. I mean, look. I'm not someone that says, okay, progressives run on, the socially progressive, economically progressive, go run all those issues in, Rust Belt states, in the southern states. But, if it works for him, if it works for Fetterman somehow, I mean, look, I'm happy to be proven wrong.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be proven wrong. So, look, if he goes on nationally, he tries to be like, next Jamie Harrison, goes on to DNC, or tries to, go back to state politics, working on the grassroots like Stacey Abrams has been doing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, he could be. He definitely could be. He could prove me wrong on this race. He could prove me wrong on, anything. But, more likely than not, I don't think, he's going to win. His policies could work, especially with someone like John Fetterman in Pennsylvania. But, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting because I really could see someone like Charles Booker in a great position as a red state organizing role, kind of very much like a Stacey Abrams character, getting these kind of policies, and at least convincing people, as I said, through going door to, earlier in the segment or in the show, going door to door, saying like, we're the Democratic Party. Here's what we want to do for you. Like, here's why you should support us. Like, that is something that. And actually, delivering on it at a very small level with those are two equally important parts of the equation there. But that could be very, very helpful in, if he's doing that at towns that just have been, so systematically ignored, especially in a state like Kentucky, where you have Mitch McConnell practically running that state. And you have seen how I don't know. Yeah, you probably haven't, been to Kentucky personally, but the results, statistically, neither have I, by the way. The results statistically do speak for themselves. And there are some other people like him. For example, Mandela Barnes in the U.S. Senate. He is currently the lieutenant governor and running in the state's 2022 race. And this could be interesting because he may be going up against one of the biggest kind of Trump people in the Senate, Ron Johnson, who is mulling at this point a re-election bid. He's a very, very interesting person to me because he's the first black person to serve as Wisconsin lieutenant governor, supporter of Medicare for all, climate change legislation, and a slew of other progressive priorities. And really what raises my eyebrows here is he has all that and a Jim Clyburn endorsement, which, given Jim Clyburn's real hostility and I think just fear for political and power reasons of the progressive left, has been very, very surprising. So this could be a very interesting one.
I have a friend who does, redistricting for congressional districts for fun. And what he basically told me was that since Wisconsin had literally the razor thin margin in 2020 going for Biden, there's trending rightward. There's very, very little chance that Mandela Barnes will actually overtake Ron Johnson, even after Johnson pretty much debased himself over COVID and over all the Russia stuff and all the wacky comments he said over the years, just because the trending in Wisconsin is rightward, and because it's a Republican wave year.
Yeah, with the right word, the Republican wave year. That stuff is going to be very, very tough either way. But I think Democrats really in these states that they've won for so long, I think they should be these are states that they should be really kind of focusing on. It's not a sign, I think, of a healthy Democratic Party where if you're it's a sign of a Democratic Party whose I think priorities have really changed if they can't win a state like Wisconsin.
I mean, you're right. That's more to do with the fact that yes, Obama presidency really sunk a lot of the Democratic Party's bench in state legislatures and across state house officials. But we're here. We can't change that. And I mean, if you were asking where would Democrats probably pick up a seat, I mean Pennsylvania. It would be Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that politically, politically though, that is very, it depends where. It actually does depend where you're talking about in Pennsylvania, but a lot of it is politically similar to Wisconsin. So it's going to be interesting in terms of what political issues will have salience in 2022. It's definitely still too early to tell. But it is at this point not looking so good for the left. But let's get into the right here a little bit. The first politician selected here by Daily Beast is Rebecca Kleefisch, who's going to be the state's former lieutenant governor. She's joined a crowded primary to unseat Tony Evers, a Democrat who faces some of the same down-ballot difficulties that sank Terry McAuliffe's bid to reclaim the governor's mansion in Virginia. So she's a former television anchor who served 2 terms as lieutenant governor, got a boost when Ron Johnson declined to run for the post. Although former President Donald Trump has pushed for Sean Duffy to throw his hat in the ring, Kleefisch has shaped her platform around the Trumpian message on an issue that Republicans have successfully nationalized. So pretty much talking a lot about Kenosha and Tony Evers' handling of it during the riots. They may drown this aggressive rhetoric may be exactly the moment for kind of a Republican wave year, I think, when you are having a very high turnout of right-wingers. All that election stuff does kind of hang over the air. How are they going to, How much credibility will they put even in elections at this point? But I think, especially a year on from, the Georgia Senate race in January 6th, where we saw actually Republicans sitting out because of the election fears, I think it is very, very foolish to bank on that this time. I think, the Kleefisch seems like a very, very potent candidate here for Tony Evers.
I agree. I don't think Tony Evers is going to pull McAuliffe and only talk about Trump.
Yeah.
But I don't. It doesn't look good. Pretty much every swing state governor or senator defending. That includes Mark Kelly. That includes, I believe, Cortez Masto. They're definitely gonna have a tough time. I can only hope that again, people turn out and actually say no. When someone ransacks the Capitol and help protects the people who did it, we're not gonna vote for them. We're gonna vote for the other. We're gonna vote for the people who may not have everything, but daily stand for liberal democracy.
Yeah, I really think that, maybe it should. Personally, I do not think that the January 6th event left as indelible a mark on the American psyche where that would be a salient political issue coming up. But the last politician we will discuss is going to be a very interesting one. Michelle Fiore in Nevada running for governor. In a party full of aspiring governors who have sought the approval of the former president, Fiore may out-Trump nearly all of them. As a member of the Las Vegas City Council and former long-shot candidate for the state's first congressional district, she faces some pretty stiff competition in the Republican primary, particularly from former U.S. Senator Dean Heller. But Fiore, she's known for her borderline fanatical devotion to Trump, who she defended even after the attack on the Capitol. She could serve as a test of the former president's ability to influence Republican primary voters even out of office. She's her kickoff video pretty much saw her shooting beer bottles labeled vaccine mandate and critical race theory. She's that kind of guns and ads style Republican for sure. It's going to be interesting to see, I think, if in especially a trending blue state like Nevada, how well Fiore can do here. I don't think as well as someone like Clevefish in Wisconsin.
I have to agree. But that possibility of an upset is always there, especially, again, in a red wave year.
Yes.
I mean, is the primary still going on? Do you know?
I think it. I do not know. I'm assuming that'll all be decided at some point this year.
There might be a possibility that Dean Heller upsets it. I mean, it's Nevada. It's trending blue. I mean, there's always a possibility that there's an upset there. But, whoever does win that nomination will probably go to the Trumpian aspects, no matter what. Particularly at Florida. Nothing's impossible. as we've learned.
Yes. I think though, unfortunately, probably for the sign of our politics, the Republican Party is probably most certainly, aside from a few kind of policy issues, is more than anything kind of coalescing around the idea of Trump as a force and as a person than anything else. And whoever, as someone like Dean Heller, who has been, who is going to have to excite the Republican base to win, probably both in the very much in the primary, but definitely I think significantly in the general as well. It's going to be very, very tough for Dean to pull this one out. I would think, but we will see. Jacob, any last words? Any final thoughts before I let you go here?
Well, just thank you so much for having me on, and folks, if you're interested in hearing more of what I have to say, I co-host Gen Zers Talk Politics. Wherever you get your podcasts. We also have a website, genzerstalkpolitics.com. And if you're interested in reading what else I've written on a TUFTS Daily, check out my columns.
All right, yeah, go check out that Better Consensus column there on TUFTS Daily for sure, and of course the podcast as well. Jacob, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you on Wednesday for more Newsflash.